Spitfire Audio just came out with the next installment to their Abbey Road Orchestra line, Oboes. So, is this A2 section worth picking up, or should you skip this one? Let's see. So, up to this point, I've been able to review every single Abbey Road Orchestra product from Spitfire Audio on this channel. And if you missed any of those, I have a playlist that houses all of them. So if you want a little bit more insight into how I think the woodwinds, not only in pricing, but also in functionality, sort of fit in the typical composer's workflow, then check out the flute and clarinets video, especially the flutes video, because when that product came out, there was a lot of discussion about the value of that library. And there's a lot of discussion in that would apply to oboes as well, but I'm not going to go deep into that. So if you're interested in checking out any of those reviews, do check it out in that playlist. Now, Spitfire Audio did send me this. They didn't tell me to say anything specific. These are all just going to be my thoughts, and I'm going to be honest whether or not I think you should pick it up. Okay, so the oboes library is housed in the typical Abbey Road Orchestra plugin, which I personally really like. I think it's nice. Now, this isn't going to be a walkthrough of these sounds, and a lot of these articulations are the same ones that are also in Abbey Road Orchestra flutes and clarinets. So I like the consistency there. I think the only thing that is missing is that there's no flutter tongue effect on the oboe, and I don't even know if it's possible to do on the oboe, but it is in the flutes and clarinets libraries. Okay, why don't we listen to a bit of it? Okay, so let's talk about oboes in general as an instrument, because up to this point, the Abbey Road Orchestra series, when it comes to woodwinds, each of these sections are two players recorded in unison. Now, after flutes came out and then clarinets came out, one would figure that oboes would be somewhere in there, and then bassoons would also be probably next after this one. But considering all four of those different sections, I figured ahead of time that the oboes would actually be the least useful of the entire range. And I only say that because oboes have a bit of, not a pungent sound, but they have a bright, more obvious sound in an overall texture. So oftentimes composers and orchestrators will be careful not to use an oboe or even two oboes in unison for that matter, until they really need it, especially in lighter textures. Now, there are exceptions to everything, but I think of the four instruments, the oboe is less used except in solo contexts, and this is not a solo library. So, we all know the sound of a solo oboe, but what about two oboes in unison? What kind of sound does that get you? It sort of gets you like, it doesn't get you twice the volume. That's not how the physics works. Two oboes gives you a harder sound that actually makes it sound a bit like a trumpet, maybe a softer trumpet, but the overtones of the oboe are similar to the trumpet that you can actually get away with if you need a high trumpet or a softer trumpet sound. Using two oboes in unison is a great way to have that effect without using an actual trumpet. There are all kinds of examples that I could point to where that's practical, but just throwing that out. So we have the same performance legato and lyrical legato extended punches. This is on the Pro version, which includes short notes as well as legato slurred. Now a quick note on balance. This library sounds a little distant. This is with mix 1 up, which is the full sounding room mix at Abbey Road Studios. But I do like that it's not too invasive, and that's great for an out-of-the-box mix. And I'll go into a little bit more detail on my thoughts on that a little later as well. We have some longs. Again extended, so there's the soft entrance to the notes, the standard, and then the accented attack. A myriad of short notes. Really, I sort of think of these as just different lengths of all of these notes. So staccatissimo is the shortest of them all. Staccato, slightly longer. Staccato alt, slightly longer still. Marcato. And tenuto. Double tongue, triple tongue, and then quad tongue, which I know that sort of technique is difficult to do on a double reed instrument like the oboe. Myriad of trills, and then the legato broken up if you don't want to use one of the performance ones. Okay, now let's talk about the way it sounds and the mixing and all the room considerations. So to do that, I'm going to go into my ultimate template, which is my template I use for all my projects. This, if you're interested, is available at ernestocomposer.com/templates. If you're interested, if you think you might find something like that useful. But what I did was I integrated this library into the template. Now, because up to this point, this is the A2 section, there is no solo oboes or anything. I still have the regular orchestra that I use, the BBC Symphony Orchestra, in my template. It's just in addition to that, the A2 instruments I have in there. And then BBC also has A3 oboes, which I almost never use because frankly, to me, that's more oboes than I need. Okay, so here's my template. You'll see under this oboes folder, which is under the woodwinds stack, that I have the regular BBC SO oboe, then the ARO oboes A2, and then the BBC SO oboes A3, as well as the BBC Cor Anglais, which we haven't gotten from Abbey Road yet. Actually, why don't I record something? I'm going to record something on the legato oboes from Abbey Road Orchestra, and then copy the same MIDI information to BBC, and we're going to do a little comparison. Okay, so just put a little thing down. Why don't I quantize that? Excuse that little bump in my modulation. Now let's copy this exact MIDI region and apply it to the single oboe from BBC SO. This is using BBC's default mix 1. All right, let's listen to that. So the first thing that sticks out to me is the difference in volume between BBC Symphony Orchestra and Abbey Road Orchestra. And I've been finding this as I am starting to have more of a blend of both libraries in my template, that I really have to account for how loud BBC Symphony Orchestra is. Now let's turn off mix 1 and turn up just the tree, and let's see if that evens out the sound a little bit. So I'm gonna go back to the beginning. So they both have a different sound. I don't think BBC's sounds bad at all, but there is a difference between one oboe playing by itself and two oboes playing in unison. Now, just for the sake of comparison, let's again duplicate all this MIDI to the A3 track from BBCSO. That one's way louder than the A2 from ARO. Now the ARO sounds just sound more natural to me. This just feels like there are a bunch of microphones up, and that's the mix that you're sort of listening to. So whenever I use the oboes in BBCSO, I turn off mix 1 and turn up only the tree. Now let's check out what that sounds like, not using mix 1, but instead use mix 2, which is slightly more directional. Now you can tell that there are two players playing there, but the intonation is quite on, and oboes are notoriously one of the most difficult woodwind instruments to master, particularly because it's so sensitive to the little variations in a player's technique that can affect its pitch and intonation. So two oboists playing in unison, they really have to know what they're doing in order to blend so well like this, and boy do they sound really great here. Let's check out the section overheads. This is a common microphone to hear in scores or even other kinds of mixes to have up specifically for the woodwinds. It's over the woodwind section, so it gives you a little bit of a closer sound. Let's see what that sounds like. Yeah, you can hear a slight bit of phasing between the two instruments, but that's to be expected when two players are playing in unison, so it gives it a slightly maybe thicker sound, and they sound harder. Now with that microphone, the room really starts to sort of disappear. Let's check out one of the trees. Yeah, I really like the sound of mix 1, honestly. I love how natural it sounds. So I want to talk a little bit about the application of a library like this. A combination of two oboes together, like I mentioned, is just a little less useful than, say, two flutes together, or two clarinets together, or even two bassoons together for that matter. The sound can get to be a little much, so if you're a completionist, you might be inclined to get this library. If you're trying to be really picky about which libraries you're gonna pick up in this line, or something along those lines, I would say that this should probably be towards the bottom of your list in terms of by priority, because of the use case of A2 oboes is just more rare than all of the other instruments. Now, I've said this in the previous two woodwinds reviews for flutes and clarinets of Abbey Road Orchestra. The core library, I think, is a very good value because you get mix 1, you don't get any of these other microphones. The performance legato, not extended, so you don't get those extra like crescendo notes, straight note, and then accented note beginnings. But the legato itself, I think, sounds really, really nice. And especially if you already have Abbey Road Orchestra products, you get a bit of a discount to the core version for this library. So instead of it being $99, it could be more like maybe $90 or $80. And on a sale could be even more. If at any point you want to upgrade, then you can pay the difference, and if you're waiting for a sale, you can pay even less. But what I would say is save your money instead for maybe a professional version of just an oboe by itself. Now, I have no insight into whether Spitfire's going to have maybe oboe 1 and oboe 2 as two separate libraries. That could be a possibility. But I would say that is more useful, so you could probably spend more on that library, maybe not this library. That being said though, let's hear this a little bit more in context. So if you've been following this series, you know that I have a mock-up of Marian's theme by John Williams. I originally created that in BBC Symphony Orchestra Professional, and if you want to see what that sounds like, I have a video where I show off that mock-up and also describe my considerations when making it. But since the Abbey Road Orchestra line has been coming out, I thought it would be cool to sort of compare the two. So I have been replacing the instruments with Abbey Road Orchestra as they appear. Now the interesting thing about Marian's theme is that the melody starts off in the woodwinds with 2 flutes in unison, 2 clarinets in unison, and those were the last 2 libraries that we had. So those have been sounding really, really great together. When the theme comes back, 2 oboes in unison join them, which is convenient because now we have 2 oboes in unison, so we get to see how that sounds like and how they sort of blend. Now do keep in mind, I programmed this with BBC Symphony Orchestra in mind. The way I would program it again with Abbey Road Orchestra, I think would be different. There are more dynamic layers to Abbey Road Orchestra, and the balance is different between BBC Symphony Orchestra and Abbey Road Orchestra. I think the balance is much more natural and a little nicer with Abbey Road Orchestra, but nonetheless, I digress. So here's the project. You can see that these flute parts I had playing at the same time. Now they're just in one track. So similarly, because the oboe in BBC is so just loud and in your face, I only recorded it with the single oboe, but it's supposed to be an odd 2-part. All right, let's listen to the beginning of this with the Abbey Road Orchestra woodwinds. There's going to be a little bit of BBC SO with the celeste and harp, and that'll be as far as we go. Oboes come in right there. Let's check it out. So I really like how well they blend together. Now what the oboes do in a section like this, oboes naturally are much brighter. Like I mentioned, their overtones are very accentuated like a trumpet's is. And compared to flutes and clarinet, which are warmer, the entrance of 2 oboes in unison is just a little bit more clear or obvious because the sound becomes brighter. So let's see if we can spot that difference a little. Nice. Now let's listen to some of that again, but only hearing the Abbey Road Orchestra stuff. Nice. I think that sounds really good. Now, a mixer more capable than me could probably get this to sound really, really lovely and natural and maybe more cinematic. I'm curious now, what happens if we listen only to tree 1 to get sort of the most naturalistic sound that we can possibly get? I'm just gonna mute mix 1 and turn up tree 1, and that's it. That's a very like bare bones orchestral sound, but I'm curious what that would sound like. So all of the Abbey Road Orchestra sounds just have tree 1 up, which is the broad sounding room mix there in Abbey Road Orchestra. There in Abbey Road Studio 1. So let's listen to that from the beginning and see how they blend together. Just the same microphone across all of them. Keep in mind that this is still going through my processing in my template, so my EQs, my reverb, maybe a little bass boosting here and there, compressor, whatever is running through the woodwinds and the strings, it's still running through, but in terms of microphone position, this is it. Yeah, if I were like programming it like that, I would change the automation and a lot of the way that it is just to rebalance it because it sounds a little out of balance to me now. But those kinds of considerations are something that as you get to know the libraries that you're working with, you just know, oh, I should program this instrument like this because it's louder, or, you know, just the way it all blends together. So I do like the way Mix 1 sounds across the woodwinds. I wouldn't keep it like this. Okay, I don't want to make this review too long because then I would be just rehashing the same things that I had said in the flutes video and the clarinets video. This sound is really, really nice, and especially compared to BBC Symphony Orchestra, which is just, BBC Symphony Orchestra doesn't go quite as deep as the sort of sampling prowess as this displays. But if you already have a decent oboe sound in your sample library arsenal, if you even use oboe sounds in your sample library arsenal, then this might be one that you have at the bottom of your wish list. Because I think in order of usefulness, to me anyway, flutes, A2 is the most useful sound. I like using flutes, double. There are many use cases in which I use them that way. Then clarinets, A2, and then oboes. I assume that in 3 months from now, because it seems like the Abbey Road Orchestra series has a new installment every 3 months. 3 months ago we had percussion corps, 3 months before that was clarinets. I'm assuming that in 3 months will be Abbey Road Orchestra bassoons, and that it'll be 2 bassoon players in unison. That to me is a more useful sound than 2 oboes in unison. Again, 2 oboes in unison has its place. It's just the characteristic sound of an oboe you would just prefer to have by itself rather than the ensemble sound of 2 oboes in unison. And it's useful. John Williams uses it here in his orchestration, but not as useful than flutes in unison or bassoons in unison or clarinets in unison. So all that being said, if you want to buy it, I would definitely suggest corps, especially if you can get it lower than retail price. But I would say continue waiting. I am wondering if after bassoons is done, what is going to be next? Are they going to go tuned percussion, because that hasn't been out yet? Or is there going to be a new strings library? We have symphonic strings already, but you know, there's still muted strings, there's still special effects strings, the whole gamut. Will they go into individual woodwinds? Will they go into brass, maybe trumpets A2 or horns A4? Who knows? I have no insight into that, but I am curious how it's going to go. So we're roughly getting about 4 Abbey Road Orchestra drops a year, which when they announced this whole line, they said that this is going to be a multi-year project, but you know, it definitely is dripping one little bit at a time. So the woodwinds so far have really been wonderful. They're really well programmed. The legatos I think sound really nice, really great, and the recordings themselves are just they're beautiful sounding. And the Mix 1 out of Abbey Road Orchestra is just way more useful than the Mix 1 from BBC Symphony Orchestra. So I'm more than happy to recommend the core version of these libraries because that mix is very usable. And if you need that A2 sound, then yeah, go for this library. I'm missing the A2 sound. The BBC only came with single instrument and then an A3. And I don't use A3s, except in the flutes, but rarely. A2 is more useful than A3 is. But anyway, I digress. So that's it for this video. If you have any questions, then comment down below. I look forward to whatever's next in this line, maybe in bassoons. So I guess I'll see you in 3 months. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, take care.